And there is a drone attack outside. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is a drone flying somewhere. I just hear it. Okay, so nevertheless, where was I?
The Russian-Ukrainian war has stretched for over 1,000 days, and there is still no end in sight.
Collective West failed to provide an adequate support. Like, we are given very small amounts of support. Like, we actually need 100%, and we receive like 20, 30, maybe 40% sometimes. But it's not enough. All the time, it's not enough.
This is Dmytro Mrachnik, a prolific writer and tattoo artist. He has been involved in the Russo-Ukrainian War since 2022. Today, Dmytro and Oleg, another frontline fighter, will provide unique insights into the war as activists, writers, and artists. They will be joined by Ksenya, who provides them and hundreds of other fighters, civilians, and animals with crucial survival resources for a volunteer network called Solidarity Collectives. Uniting people across socio-political differences that many in the US would find deal-breaking, Solidarity Collectives is working towards a free and just society amidst war.
Нема сумлення в душах рабських, і тягнем ми на новий строй, старую песню і чужую, цыгане шумною толпой по Бессарабии кочуют.
My priority from the beginning was to save my friends, my comrades in arms, who decided to participate in this struggle, decided to resist, to sacrifice their lives, health in this very horrifical war. I wanted to do as much as I could to make them survive, to make them pass through this. I wanted to be with them.
This is Ksenya, a long-standing volunteer of Solidarity Collectives. To her, Solidarity Collectives is all about creating community through action by providing crucial aid to those on the front lines.
Our volunteer associations, like the Solidarity Collectives, are very helpful while dealing with problems. And our friends are showing support to the tens, I don't know, maybe even hundreds of soldiers. There are dozens of different foundations that help the frontline soldiers little by little. And this is actually warming your heart and making you feel like you were not forgotten by your friends.
Initiated by a group of Ukrainian anarchists, Solidarity Collectives has grown into a community of diverse political convictions, from punk rockers to trade unionists.
For long years, I was considering myself as an anarchist, but the practice of the real-life war makes this all look like kind of a lifestyle action. Nowadays, I don't even think that the discussion of anarchism or ideology like that, I don't think it's relatable.
Despite their differences, all members of the collective face a common enemy: colonial imperial politics, according to which the world order is determined by whoever has more weapons and fossil deposits. With a full-scale war ongoing, all members of the collective also share a strategy: resisting Russia's imperial onslaught of Ukraine.
I find possibility of this solidarity networking very useful to make this sort of leftist activist comrades, like people to whom I feel respect and the same values as mine, to make them survive.
To Ksenia, the best way to support those most directly involved in resistance is by building a community rooted in solidarity.
Our work is to give the face to this war, make these people to hear human voices, anarchist voices from the deepest, bloodiest corners of this war.
On the broader scale, the efforts of Solidarity Collectives are minuscule. They fundraised over $200,000 during 2023, while just 1 day of war costs Ukraine around $100 million. But the grand impact of their work is not material.
And we were seeing ourselves as collective that after helping soldiers and after the war ends, we're starting to help rebuilding communities, invest in rebuilding of Ukraine society, building new practices and values. And we already start doing this now, like we are putting ourselves in helping people and cooperating with them. So I guess it is our main narrative that we want to invest in horizontal, egalitarian rebuilding of society, to put there as much sides of horizontality, political, leftist values as we could.
Culture work is at the heart of Solidarity collectives, and being an international network, much of their efforts are directed to challenging global narratives.
It's one of the main narratives of our organization that we try to spread, that it's human war, that it's society war, war of a big commune of people for their freedom and for their future. It's not like state, we see state versus state. It's not NATO against Russia. It's very real people, very existential choice for each of people of these soldiers, volunteers to participate in struggle for their lives.
Mainstream Western media prioritizes information most easily digestible for their audience, such as statements by political officials and data-driven reports. But the true narratives of this war are at the front lines.
Here in the center of war, we understand exactly that this is not NATO and NATO countries fighting against Russia here. This is Ukrainians just devoting their lives for their motherland.
This is Oleg. You've heard a song of his at the beginning of this episode.
I'm interested in music and literary writing, creative writing. And ironically, I won the literary contest this year.
To Solidarity collectives, the distortion of their struggle into a fight of empires is not just a passive byproduct of mass media storytelling, but an intentional process of Western colonial structures.
To hear such narrative from Western people, from people, activists, mostly like anarchist, leftist, from Europe, from USA, it's a problem of colonial thought, colonial mind, authoritarian mind that's deeply rooted somewhere in our heads, because they're dehumanizing the local small country, bit powerless, with its own perspective of political growth, of future, not in ranks of big mastodons of empires, not seeing this country, not seeing this society, but see some bigger forces like empires upon it, and see it as a puppet of these empires. It's really colonial logic.
Whether or not the efforts of Ukrainians are recognized, it is them who actually prevent Russia from eradicating the Ukrainian land and people.
When the full-scale invasion started, because of some very, for me, interesting sort of this social solidarity of uniting people who never keep their arms in their hands, of their very specific networking and cooperation, Ukraine was able to stand against Russia.
Since the beginning of full-scale invasion, governments of Ukraine and beyond have been unable to fully meet the needs of those on the front lines.
I call this process racing from infantilism. Just before the full-scale invasion, there was a widespread opinion in Ukraine that nothing will start and everything will be fine, and everything was just destroyed by full-scale invasion.
To Oleg, the full-scale war is a catalyst that forced Ukrainians to cease dependence on hierarchical structures. In order to stand against Russian conquest, Ukrainians learned to take on responsibility for each other.
All this process is devoted to the neglect of infantilism and gaining a new experience in this age of full-scale war. I mean, experience of solidarity, of collective aid. This war teaches us to make responsible decisions for our life. All those events are devoted to gaining a responsibility.
External media often describes Ukrainians as puppets of NATO, but according to solidarity collectives, the war has only lessened people's faith in the state.
Like sometimes we have questions, but because like anarchists are cooperating with army and our army is like state structure, aren't you thinking that you like will like state as it is? No. Like obviously during the war you see even bigger like hole between people and state.
The war has made explicit the corruption and incompetence of existing political systems that in times of greatest need they exploit rather than protect.
All these political ideas of Western worlds are outdated. The last 3 years presented us that some country like Russia can just break this international law and nobody will fight against it. Nobody but Ukrainians.
But not all Ukrainians chose to support each other, as exploitation is far more profitable than mutual aid.
Here it's very visible the like two groups of society, like from one side volunteers, activists, soldiers, who really on very basic grassroots level find themselves in struggle, in help, in solidarity actions, but also you feel the division with power, state people, ministries, institution of police.
After Russia retreated away from Kiev and the front line stabilized in the east, many Ukrainians chose to fabricate a sense of peace and normalcy instead of continuing mutual aid efforts.
You know, each city is quite different, and the city of Kiev, it's quite protected, quite like calm, full of life, full of some sort of parties, work in restaurants, very big illusion of peaceful, nice city. Except if you don't want to open the eyes and look at the horrors of reality on the east.
For those distant from the consequences of occupation, it's easy to look away. To Ksenya, withdrawal from the struggle is reflective of Ukrainian society's broader tendencies.
Our society don't have such a big bond to political solidarity actions, to like understanding political value of district meetings, assemblies, or organizing in big anti-neoliberal actions.
3 years into the full-scale war, Solidarity Collectives continues to expand their network and material support. But the broader society in Ukraine and beyond is withdrawing from the fight, and that has consequences on those who can't or refuse to return to normal.
I feel myself really tired. Just during all this timing of full-scale invasion, I didn't have really time for some big, let's say, holiday rest. And at all specific of war is pretty stressful. At some moment, like you think it's enough, like you couldn't get stressed more, but then it come one more little thing you worrying about the lives of your family, of comrades, of your city. This is all pretty exhausting. More people get tired, more war going on, and this sort of depression, hard hard times come, the more people start not say leaving, but put in less attention and motivation to do something more in this area, like more concentrating on surviving.
While Russia continues its conquest, Ukrainians grow more exhausted and isolated. As a result, they are forced to return to the state structures.
I was trying to reach the anarchists from Western countries starting from 2014, and no matter how many people could I make to change their minds, it doesn't really affect almost anything. Like I can get more friends, and maybe those friends in the future war will show some support, providing cars at least. Well, that's pretty helpful, but it doesn't makes a big deal after all.
Having spent nearly 3 years fighting, Dmytro recognizes the limits of interpersonal networks in facing one of the world's largest empires. He despises the state, but he cannot survive without its assistance.
People just lose their previous priorities while understanding the real costs of defeat. You know, if we will be defeated and we lose our national state, we'll be just fucked up. We'll be just fucking erased. That's not because I like the state institutions so much. It's pretty disgusting. I'm sure that everybody will agree on it, not only the anarchists. But you have no other way, just no other way to survive and to prosper and strive, after all.
While Solidarity Collectives is building towards an egalitarian society, they can't reject the war, even if everything about it runs contrary to their beliefs.
How can you fight one of the biggest military forces in the world while using pistol? Russia is huge. You can't afford the guerrilla warfare all over its territory. It would be even harsh to manage the guerrilla warfare even in Ukraine. Yes, we have some reports about guerrilla warfare movements, but they are not independent actors that can provide any military operation by their own and achieve some success.
Solidarity Collectives is unable to resist Russia by themselves, but they are fighting for their own sake rather than imperial interests.
This resistance now, based on human intentions, a lot on like simple humans, not institution, not states. For sure, like without super rockets, Atacams, and like Bradleys, this war would be lost if we will not have them. But still, on very basic level, because of support of people, like we able to cover a lot of urgent needs.
To Dmytro, it's not only Ukrainians who are forced to fight in this war.
Russian people are living in the pretty harsh conditions. They have no time for the morale. They have no time for philosophy. They are like squirrels in the wheels, you know, trying to survive in the harsh environment of Russia. And they are not even considering politics.
According to Ночлежка, the largest homeless organization in Russia, 1 out of 5 Russians has experienced homelessness. With war contracts offering a way out of poverty and prison, joining the war likely goes beyond the moral principles of many Russians.
They're offering fantastic money for it. And if the money flow stops, they would lose all the interest in joining this war. They're not actually liking it.
Russia's economy is far from collapse, as Western sanctions are neither well enforced nor expensive enough. To Ksenya, lack of aid is not simply a byproduct of war fatigue, but a consequence of the global resurgence of imperial politics.
Well, if look at all from global perspective on like sort of anti-authoritarian movement, I think it will be okay to say that it's in deep crisis, like crisis of sort of ideas, practices, and theoretical perspectives for nowadays.
Imperial narratives are rising on the political right, and the left is failing to stand against them.
Far-right politics getting higher. People from very deep crisis of this political reality try to find themselves a bit uselessly in some pacifist statements or like anti-militarist. In situation of global dehumanization and a rise in neoliberal politics, it's obvious that it will affect like minds of people.
While more explicit in conservative politics, imperial narratives and an unwillingness to support Ukraine are also seen on the left.
I have to state that there is widespread opinion among, for example, Western leftists that in Ukraine and NATO imperialism is fighting against Russian imperialism, for example.
The right wants to cut all funding to Ukraine, but the left is not providing enough aid either. Politicians may be framing the stance on Ukraine differently, but both of them share the end goal: freezing the conflict.
Russia was going to have to accept an enemy army with nuclear weapons right on its border.
This is Stephen Kinzer, a Boston Globe columnist who has been calling the war a proxy war provoked by NATO expansion. Kinzer has repeatedly spoken at the Ukraine A Time for Peace campaign in Massachusetts, which aims to pressure U.S. politicians to stop supplying aid to Ukraine and instead initiate a ceasefire.
And our hope is that there are more and more people coming to the opinion that this war has to end and has to end now. And that the way to do that is through pushing the idea of ceasefire and negotiations.
This is Paul Shannon, the chair of the campaign. The ceasefire he calls for is formulated by the imperialist views of analysts like Stephen Kinzer. Paul Shannon's campaign gives no voice to the people fighting for their survival. Kinzer has been featured by right-wing platforms too, such as the Tulsi Gabbard Show. You may remember a bill titled the Protect Women's Sports Act. It was introduced by Tulsi Gabbard.
Let's have a realistic view. Let's exercise restraint. Let's pursue diplomacy. Let's not go and launch these wars that take many different forms, but ultimately undermine both our national and economic interests.
Two narratives on the war resonate with both left and right politicians alike: that the war in Ukraine is a war between empires, and therefore the opinion of Ukrainian people can be ignored. Then, the war is also too costly to be continued. But too costly for whom?
Russian Federation symbolizes all the evil that I just can imagine. I mean totalitarianism, lack of civil rights, for example, LGBT rights, everything connected with so-called democratic or liberal views. I mean, all those cases of raping and killing of civil people, all those cases were made by Russian army from the first day of full-scale invasion.
The consequences of losing the war will be deadly, and not just for Ukrainians.
If Russia succeeds, there would be the rise of the dictatorship, right-wing populists all over the world. The new diplomacy and the new world order would be blood for blood.
While these are horrific consequences for the Ukrainian people, oppression and conquest have long been strategies of empire states, whether those in office are left or right-leaning. Neither the ceasefire that the conservative politicians are calling for, nor the insufficient aid from progressives is designed to hold Russia accountable. Both strategies serve the fundamental interest of the imperial ecosystem: to weaken the Russian Empire, but prevent it from collapsing.
Because if Russia collapses, that would be the huge disaster. That would be the change of regional roles of different countries, a huge turmoil. They will lose all predictions. When the conflict is not predictable, this sounds disastrous for Western officials.
Even 3 years into the full-scale war, Russia remains the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. Allowing Russia to occupy Ukraine will have consequences on human rights everywhere, but for imperial economies, standing up for the freedom of Ukrainians is much more life-threatening.
They want to make Russia stay as it is, maybe make it more or less humanized, but not falling apart or not collapsing. Maybe you remember when the henchmen rebellion started last year in Russia, when the henchmen of the Wagner group were marching from Rostov towards Moscow. It was a huge panic around Russia, and also I can say that our Western partners showed some kind of courage around that. They were just like, oh, well, we have nothing to do with this. Like, we will just stay around and look how does this all finishes.
Throughout the war, Ukraine has been held back from resisting adequately.
They can simply assassinate all those bad guys. If there are nobody who is interested in the conflict going on and escalating, so actually the front lines are freezing and after a few months even collapsing.
To Dmytro, it is not nuclear escalation or high taxpayer costs that Western officials are really concerned about, but Ukrainians pushing Russia into defeat.
Like Russians are hitting all over Ukraine with their missiles, and when we try to attack some target at Russian soil, it sounds kind of escalation. We didn't wanted this war. We were involved just because Russia simply invaded. And so while we are defending ourselves and trying to methodically destroy Russian capabilities, each time we have some success, it's portrayed like the escalation in the West. Like, oh my God, they killed the general in Moscow. That's really an escalation.
As a result, Solidarity Collectives is fighting on two fronts at once, against Russian invaders and against misinformative narratives from many Western countries. Neither Ksenya, nor Oleg, nor Dmytro hold positive outlooks on the future of war, even if Ukraine will manage to return some of its territories in 2025.
It's pretty bad situation. To be true is after election of Trump, some sort of illusions of brightful future get erased.
And if Putin dies because of the old age, it doesn't matter. Some other old guy can step in the Kremlin and proceed and prolongate this war.
Putin made this decision instead of Ukrainians. He didn't ask us what we want to do, what political structure we have to build, and so on. Putin thinks that Ukrainians don't exist, that Ukraine is not a country, that Ukraine is just some maybe error of history. And all of this is totally a lie.
Regardless of the outcomes of this war, Solidarity Collectives keep working towards a just society.
I think our collective will stay where we are and work in this situation and put in our priority on the most needed things. If it's justice, if it's returning of territories, we will try to put ourselves in it. If it helping people who suffered from the war to do rehabilitation of soldiers, of our comrades, to return to normal life society, we will do this. If it will be returning of military prisoners, and some of them are anarchist military prisoners, we will work for this.
You've been listening to Query, Madison's longest-running LGBTQ+ radio show on community radio WORT Madison. I'm Matvey Muzhaev, and thank you for listening.